People do not lose power over you when you fight back. They do not lose power over you when you argue louder, or prove yourself smarter, or outperform them in public. They lose power over you the moment they cannot predict you, the moment they look into your eyes and find nothing to grab onto, the moment they search your face for a reaction and come back empty, the moment they throw something at you emotionally, a provocation, an insult, a test, a manipulation, and instead of getting the response they expected, they get silence, stillness, an expression that reveals absolutely nothing about what is happening inside you. That is the moment their control begins to collapse. Not because you defeated them, but because you became invisible to them, unreadable, unpredictable, and an unpredictable person is the most dangerous person in any room, any relationship, any negotiation, any conflict. Not dangerous because they are violent, not dangerous because they are cruel, dangerous because they cannot be managed, cannot be anticipated, cannot be steered, cannot be played. Every form of manipulation, every form of social control, every form of psychological dominance depends on one essential ingredient: predictability. The ability to predict how you will respond, what will trigger you, where your vulnerabilities are, what buttons to push to get the desired reaction. And the moment you become impossible to read, you remove that ingredient entirely. You become a locked door with no visible keyhole, a game with no visible rules, a puzzle with no visible edges. And the people who were relying on their ability to read you, to predict you, to manage you through the subtle and not so subtle manipulation of your emotional responses, suddenly find themselves standing in front of something they have never encountered before, a person they cannot control. And for most people, that is terrifying. Not because you have threatened them, but because you have removed the one thing that made them feel safe in their relationship with you. Their ability to see what you were going to do before you did it. Their ability to know what you were feeling before you expressed it. Their ability to stay one step ahead of you by reading the signals that you were unconsciously broadcasting to anyone who cared to look. Those signals are gone now, and the people who depended on them are lost. Let me tell you something about human interaction that most people never consciously examine, but that governs the dynamics of every relationship they have ever been in. Every interaction between two human beings involves, at some level, a mutual attempt to read each other, to decode each other, to build a mental model of the other person that allows you to predict their behavior, anticipate their reactions, and navigate the interaction with some degree of confidence about what is going to happen next. This is not optional. This is not something you can choose to do or not do. It is a fundamental feature of human social cognition, hardwired into your brain by millions of years of evolution. Your brain is a prediction machine. It is constantly, automatically, usually unconsciously building models of the people around you based on the data they provide. And the primary source of that data is their behavior, their words, their expressions, their body language, their emotional reactions, their patterns, their habits, their predictable responses to predictable stimuli. All of this data flows into your brain's social prediction engine and produces a model that tells you, with varying degrees of accuracy, what this person is likely to do next, how they are likely to respond to what you say, what they are likely to feel about what happens. And this model, this mental representation of the other person, is what allows you to navigate the interaction, to choose your words, to calibrate your approach, to manage the relationship in a way that serves your needs, whether those needs are benign or manipulative, generous or exploitative. Now consider what happens when someone becomes impossible to read, when the data stream that feeds your prediction model suddenly goes dark, when the person you thought you understood, whose reactions you thought you could anticipate, whose emotional landscape you thought you had mapped, suddenly becomes opaque, unpredictable, unreadable. Your prediction model fails, not partially, completely. The inputs that the model depends on are no longer available. The behavioral data that fed it has been cut off. The emotional signals that calibrated it have gone silent, and you are left standing in front of a person who you cannot predict, cannot anticipate, cannot model, and therefore cannot manage. And this experience, the experience of encountering someone you cannot read, produces a very specific and very powerful psychological response. It produces uncertainty, and uncertainty in the human social brain is not a neutral experience. It is not a comfortable, take it or leave it state. Uncertainty is a threat signal. It triggers the same neural circuits that respond to physical danger. It activates the amygdala. It increases cortisol. It heightens vigilance. It creates the specific, unmistakable, physiologically measurable state of being on alert that the human body produces whenever it encounters something it cannot predict and therefore cannot prepare for. This is why unreadable people command attention, not because they demand it, not because they perform for it, but because the human brain cannot ignore them. It is wired at the most fundamental level to pay attention to anything it cannot predict, because unpredictable things in the ancestral environment were potentially dangerous, and the brain that ignored unpredictable things did not survive to pass on its genes. The brain that paid close attention to unpredictable things, that gave them extra processing resources, that allocated heightened vigilance to anything it could not model, this brain survived. And this is the brain you have. The brain that automatically, involuntarily, almost compulsively pays attention to anything and anyone it cannot predict. Which means that the unreadable person, simply by being unreadable, commands a quality of attention that the most verbose, most expressive, most emotionally trained person in the room can never achieve. Marcus Aurelius practiced this art of unreadability not as a social strategy, but as a natural consequence of the self-mastery he cultivated through decades of philosophical practice. He was an emperor surrounded by people who were constantly trying to read him, senators trying to gauge his political intentions, generals trying to anticipate his military strategy, courtiers trying to predict his favor, rivals trying to detect his weaknesses. And Marcus understood that in this environment, transparency was not a virtue, it was a vulnerability. Every emotion he displayed could be exploited. Every opinion he expressed could be used against him. Every reaction he revealed could be calibrated against to produce a more effective manipulation the next time. And so he developed, through the daily practice of self-examination and emotional regulation that his meditations document, a quality of presence that was extraordinarily difficult to read. Not because he was performing inscrutability, not because he was wearing a mask, but because his emotional life was genuinely internal. His reactions were genuinely processed before they were expressed. His judgments were genuinely considered before they were communicated. He had developed such a thorough and such a genuine command of his own inner world that the gap between his internal experience and his external expression was entirely under his control. He chose what to reveal and what to withhold. He chose when to react and when to remain still. He chose which emotions to display and which to process privately. And this choice, this genuine sovereignty over his own expression, made him extraordinarily difficult to read, not impossible. No one is completely unreadable, but difficult enough that the people around him could never be confident that they understood what he was thinking or feeling or planning. And this uncertainty, this inability to build a reliable model of the emperor's inner state, was one of the most powerful tools in his political arsenal. Not because he used it to manipulate, but because it prevented others from manipulating him. Now I want to go deep into the specific qualities that make a person genuinely impossible to read, because there is a crucial difference between performing inscrutability and embodying it. And the difference matters enormously, because people can almost always detect the performance. They can feel the difference between someone who is genuinely composed and someone who is suppressing, between someone who is genuinely at peace and someone who is holding tension beneath a calm surface, between someone whose stillness comes from genuine inner stability and someone whose stillness is a rigid, effortful, energy-consuming act of containment that could crack at any moment. The performance of unreadability is exhausting and ultimately ineffective because it requires constant monitoring, constant adjustment, constant management of your external presentation in response to what you perceive others perceiving. And this constant management is itself a form of reactivity. You are reacting to the attempt to read you by managing what they see. And the person who is truly skilled at reading people can detect this management, can see the effort beneath the surface, can identify the specific tells that reveal that you are performing calm rather than experiencing it. And once they detect the performance, they have you. Because the performance itself is data. The specific way you manage your expression tells them what you are trying to hide. The particular areas where your control is most rigid tell them where your vulnerability is greatest. The moments when the mask slips even fractionally tell them exactly what is underneath. Genuine unreadability is something entirely different. It is not the suppression of your inner state. It is the genuine regulation of it, not the hiding of your reactions, but the genuine processing of them before they reach the surface, not the performance of calm, but the actual lived, neurologically real experience of being calm in situations where others would be reactive. And this genuine regulation, this authentic inner stability that produces an exterior of genuine composure rather than performed stillness, is the product not of social strategy but of deep personal development. It is the product of having done the work that the Stoics prescribed, the work of examining your own reactions, understanding your own triggers, processing your own emotions, challenging your own assumptions, building a relationship with your own inner world that is so thorough, so honest, so continuously maintained that you are no longer surprised by your own reactions, no longer caught off guard by your own emotions, no longer at the mercy of impulses that arise unbidden and express themselves before you have a chance to evaluate them. You have mapped your own inner terrain so completely that nothing that arises within you is unfamiliar, and nothing that is familiar can destabilize you. Because you have already encountered it, already processed it, already made peace with it. And this inner peace, this genuine familiarity with your own psychological landscape, is what produces the exterior of unreadability that commands such extraordinary power in social situations. Not the mask, the reality beneath the mask, the genuine, hard-won, deeply earned stability of a mind that knows itself. Seneca described this quality with characteristic directness. He wrote about the wise person as someone who is not disturbed by events because they have already prepared themselves for every possible outcome. Someone who has inoculated themselves against surprise by contemplating in advance every form of difficulty that life might present. And this preparedness, this advanced processing of potential emotional challenges, is one of the key mechanisms by which the Stoics achieved genuine unreadability. They did not suppress their reactions. They pre-processed them. They thought about loss before loss arrived. They contemplated insult before insult was delivered. They imagined betrayal before betrayal occurred. And by the time the actual event arrived, they had already experienced the emotional impact in their imagination and had already worked through the response. So that when the real loss hit, when the real insult landed, when the real betrayal was revealed, they had already felt it, already processed it, already moved through the initial wave of emotional reactivity that would have produced a visible, readable, exploitable response. And what remained after the pre-processing was composure. Not performed composure, not the white-knuckled grip of suppressed emotion, but genuine, authentic, deeply felt composure that came from having already done the emotional work that the situation required. This is the Stoic path to unreadability, not suppression, preparation, not hiding, pre-processing, not wearing a mask, but doing the inner work so thoroughly that no mask is necessary, because the face you show the world is the same as the face beneath it, calm, steady, at peace, not because nothing is happening inside you, but because everything that is happening inside you has already been acknowledged, examined, understood, and integrated. Epictetus added another dimension to this understanding that I think is absolutely crucial. He taught that most people are readable because they are reactive, and they are reactive because they have confused things that are within their control with things that are not. They react to insults because they believe that their reputation is within their control and therefore must be defended. They react to losses because they believe that their possessions are within their control, and therefore their loss is a personal failure. They react to rejection because they believe that other people's opinions are within their control, and therefore rejection is evidence that they have failed to control something they should have been able to control. And all of these reactions, all of these visible, readable, exploitable emotional responses are the product of a single fundamental confusion, the confusion between what is yours and what is not, between what you can control and what you cannot, between what is up to you and what is up to fortune. Clear up this Fusion, Epictetus taught, and the reactivity disappears. Not because you stop feeling, but because you stop feeling threatened by things that were never within your control in the first place. You stop reacting to insults because you understand that your reputation is not within your control and therefore does not need to be defended. You stop reacting to losses because you understand that your possessions were never truly yours and therefore their loss is not a personal failure. You stop reacting to rejection because you understand that other people's opinions are their business, not yours, and therefore rejection carries no information about your worth. And when you stop reacting, you become unreadable, not through effort, not through strategy, not through any form of suppression or management, but through the natural, organic, effortless consequence of having cleared up the fundamental confusion that makes most people reactive and therefore readable in the first place. Now, I want to explore what happens in specific types of relationships when you become genuinely impossible to read. Because the effects are different depending on the nature of the relationship and the intentions of the other person. And understanding these specific effects is important for anyone who is considering or already practicing the art of genuine composure. In relationships with people who genuinely love you, becoming impossible to read initially creates discomfort. People who love you are accustomed to reading you. They rely on their ability to detect your moods, anticipate your needs, gauge your emotional state. And when this ability is disrupted, when you become less readable, they may feel shut out, confused, worried that something is wrong, worried that you are pulling away. And this is an important dynamic to be aware of, because becoming unreadable should not mean becoming emotionally unavailable to the people who genuinely care about you. The practice is not about building walls around your inner world that no one can penetrate. It is about choosing who you let in, about being deliberate rather than automatic in your emotional expression, about revealing yourself by choice rather than by default. And with the people who genuinely love you, the choice should often be to reveal, to share, to be open, not because you have to, not because they can extract it from you through their reading of your signals, but because you choose to, because you trust them enough to let them see what you are feeling. And the quality of this chosen revelation, this deliberate, voluntary, consciously given openness, is actually deeper and more intimate than the automatic, uncontrolled emotional transparency that most people practice. Because it is intentional, it is a gift. It is the specific, conscious decision to let someone into your inner world rather than the involuntary broadcasting of your inner world to anyone who happens to be watching. The people who love you will learn to appreciate this quality. They will learn that your openness with them is more meaningful precisely because it is chosen, because it is not given to everyone, because it is reserved, specifically and deliberately, for them. In relationships with people who are trying to manipulate you, the effect of becoming unreadable is completely different. And this is where the real power of unreadability becomes most visible. Manipulators depend on their ability to read you more than anyone else. Their entire strategy is built on the accurate prediction of your responses. They know what triggers your guilt. They know what activates your fear of abandonment. They know what buttons to push to make you compliant, apologetic, self-doubting, or desperate to please. And all of this knowledge comes from reading you, from the data you have been unconsciously providing through your visible emotional reactions. Your facial expressions when they criticize you, your body language when they withdraw affection, your verbal responses when they provoke you, your behavioral patterns when they apply pressure. All of this is data that the manipulator has collected and organized into a predictive model that allows them to control the interaction with remarkable precision. But when you become unreadable, when the data stream goes dark, the manipulator loses their instrument panel. They can no longer see the effect of their actions. They cannot tell whether their guilt trip is working. They cannot determine whether their withdrawal is creating the desired anxiety. They cannot gauge whether their provocation is producing the intended destabilization. They are flying blind. And, for a manipulator, flying blind is not just uncomfortable, it is terrifying, because their entire sense of power in the relationship is derived from their ability to predict and control your responses. And without that ability, they have no power. They are just a person, making noises. In the presence of someone who is not responding to those noises in any predictable or exploitable way, what happens next is one of the most fascinating and most revealing dynamics in human interaction. The manipulator, having lost their ability to read you, will almost always escalate. They will push harder, provoke more intensely, apply more pressure, test you with increasingly extreme behaviors designed to break through your composure and elicit the readable response they need. And this escalation, while uncomfortable, is actually a gift, because it reveals the manipulation for what it is. When someone responds to your composure, not with curiosity or respect, but with increasingly aggressive attempts to provoke a reaction, they are telling you everything you need to know about the nature of your relationship with them. They are telling you that they need your reactivity, that your emotional transparency is not something they appreciate but something they exploit, that your readability is not a feature of genuine intimacy but a tool of control. And this revelation, however painful, is invaluable, because it allows you to see clearly what was previously obscured by the noise of your own reactions. It allows you to see the relationship as it actually is, rather than as you wished it were. And it gives you the information you need to make a genuine, informed, clear-eyed decision about whether this relationship deserves your continued investment. In professional contexts, the effects of becoming unreadable are equally powerful and equally specific. In the workplace, readability is exploited constantly, though usually in less dramatic ways than in personal relationships. Colleagues read your reactions to gauge your commitment to projects. Managers read your responses to calibrate the amount of pressure they can apply. Competitors read your emotional state to identify weaknesses they can exploit. Negotiating partners read your body language to detect your real priorities beneath your stated positions. And in all of these contexts, becoming less readable gives you a significant advantage. Not because you are hiding useful information from people who deserve to have it, but because you are controlling the flow of information about your inner state, which allows you to respond to professional situations from a position of genuine choice rather than reactive transparency. The negotiator who cannot be read controls the negotiation. The employee whose commitment level cannot be gauged cannot be taken for granted. The competitor whose strategy cannot be anticipated cannot be countered before they move. The professional who maintains genuine composure under pressure commands respect that the reactive professional, however talented, cannot match. Aristotle wrote about the virtue of magnanimity, which he described as a kind of greatness of soul that manifests as a calm, unshakable dignity that is not easily disturbed by external events. The magnanimous person, in Aristotle's description, is not cold or aloof. They are deeply engaged with life. They care about what they do. They have genuine values and genuine commitments, but they are not at the mercy of their own reactions. They do not allow their emotional state to be determined by the behavior of others. They maintain a quality of inner stability that allows them to respond to the world from a position of genuine choice rather than automatic reactivity. And this magnanimity, this greatness of soul, is precisely what the practice of becoming unreadable cultivates, not as a social strategy, but as a genuine development of character, a genuine deepening of the relationship between a person and their own inner world, a genuine strengthening of the sovereignty of consciousness over expression. Let me now describe what the long-term practice of genuine unreadability produces, not in the short term, where the effects are primarily social and relational, but over years and decades, where the effects are primarily internal and transformative. Because the practice of becoming unreadable is not just about how other people experience you, it is about how you experience yourself. And the internal effects of this practice are, I believe, even more important and even more valuable than the external ones. Over the long term, the practice of genuine composure, processing your reactions internally before expressing them externally, produces a quality of self-knowledge that is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily valuable. Because when you stop automatically externalizing your inner state, when you create a gap between your experience and your expression, you are forced to spend more time with your own internal reality. You are forced to sit with your own emotions rather than immediately discharging them. You are forced to examine your own reactions rather than immediately acting on them. You are forced to understand your own triggers rather than immediately being controlled by them. And this forced intimacy with your own inner world, this sustained, patient, honest engagement with the full complexity of your own psychological landscape produces a depth of self-knowledge that most people never achieve. Because most people never sit with their own reactions long enough to understand them. They feel something and they immediately express it or act on it. The emotion arises and it is immediately discharged through words or behavior. And because it is discharged so quickly, it is never fully felt, never fully examined, never fully understood. It passes through them like water through a sieve, leaving no lasting imprint, creating no lasting understanding. But the person who holds their reactions, who processes them internally, who sits with them long enough to understand them before deciding how or whether to express them, develops a relationship with their own emotional life that is extraordinarily rich and extraordinarily nuanced. They know their own triggers, not just in the abstract but in the specific, vivid, experientially grounded detail that comes from having observed them in operation thousands of times without acting on them. They know their own patterns not just intellectually but viscerally. They know their own vulnerabilities not as theoretical weaknesses but as lived realities that they have encountered and processed and made peace with through direct, sustained, unflinching self-observation. And this self-knowledge, this deep, earned, genuinely hard-won understanding of your own inner world, is the ultimate source of the unreadability we have been discussing. Not the performance, not the mask, not the social strategy, but the genuine, profound, almost spiritual consequence of having done the work that the Stoics prescribed, the work of knowing yourself, of understanding yourself, of making yourself transparent to yourself so thoroughly that you are no longer surprised by anything that arises within you. And a person who is no longer surprised by themselves is a person who cannot be surprised by others. A person who has mapped their own inner terrain so completely that no provocation can lead them into unfamiliar territory. A person who has processed their own vulnerabilities so thoroughly that no manipulation can exploit them. A person who has, through the sustained practice of genuine self-examination, become genuinely, authentically and unshakably themselves. This is what the Stoics meant by the inner citadel. Not a wall against the world, but a foundation within yourself. Not a barrier that keeps others out, but a ground that keeps you stable regardless of what others do. Not a performance of strength, but the genuine, quiet, deeply earned reality of a mind that knows itself and that cannot be destabilized by anyone who knows it less well than it knows itself. Become this person, not through strategy, not through performance, not through the cultivation of a mysterious exterior designed to impress or intimidate, but through the genuine, daily, lifelong practice of knowing yourself, of examining yourself, of processing your own reactions with honesty and patience and courage, of sitting with your own discomfort long enough to understand what it is trying to teach you, of building thought by thought, reaction by reaction, by moment of genuine self-awareness, the kind of deep, stable, authentically grounded inner world that makes you genuinely, not performatively, but genuinely impossible to read, not because you are hiding, but because you are whole, not because you are wearing a mask, but because your face and your soul are the same thing. Calm, clear, present, and absolutely, magnificently, unshakably yours. If something in this shifted the way you think about your own transparency, your own reactivity, your own relationship with the signals you broadcast to the world without even knowing it, then you have already begun to change. Subscribe to this channel because every conversation is another step toward the kind of genuine self-mastery that makes you not just impressive to others, but genuinely free within yourself. I will see you in the next one.